right, guys, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. It's when they told me topic is substance use, and I'm like, okay, that's a broad topic, right? So I decided to put the focus on marijuana today. It's a really common thing that we see in youth, even adults. I mean, now it's kind of like alcohol being that it's legalized, that sort of thing. And so that's really where we're spending our time today. But obviously, substances in general, I mean, it affects the brain very similar to how we're going to talk about marijuana does. But just briefly, just a little bit about me. It's funny when I do these presentations, I think, we always start with our credentials and what we do, and that's all great. And I will mention what I do. But I just like to say I'm human and I'm real and I'm raw, and I've walked this journey with my own kid. I've helped people for 12 years in this profession. Many of the jobs I've had is I've worked with youth. And so I've dealt with a lot of youth struggling with substance use. I've also worked with adults struggling with substance use. So I have a lot of experience in this realm, but also personal experience. And so I always just like to say, no one's immune to this struggle, right? And so I always point that out, and that's me. And I'm just very real and raw when it comes to this. And so professionally, I'm a clinician. So I was the clinical director previously at the Hope Institute. I don't know if anybody's heard of that, but it's a suicide treatment center. So that's where I spent my last couple years, was running that and just specifically treating individuals struggling with thoughts of suicide. I think substance use, suicide, mental health, all these things all go hand in hand. Is it working now? Yay, okay. So I have a heart for the hurting and a love for the lost personally. Faith and family are my two most important things. They're my why. But yeah, I've spent over a decade supporting, like I said, children, families, individuals through life's hardest battles, really. My deeper why is I lost my son to fentanyl poisoning in 2021. And with him, I always say it began with marijuana. Marijuana was where it all began. It totally changed him, you guys. I watched him turn into a kid I didn't even recognize. Definitely damaged his brain. I saw the effects of that. He had marijuana-induced psychosis. And so, yes, the fentanyl is deadly. And the fentanyl stopped his heart. But the marijuana was where we lost him first. I always say that. So awareness is key. Another lady I connected with, I went to a youth marijuana prevention conference where I learned a lot of what I'm going to talk to you guys about today. And her son is Johnny. And so I just wanted to share this too, because she talked about how, he was this intelligent, funny, happy kid, 4.0 student. And he started getting into marijuana. It was legalized first, I believe. One of the first states was Colorado. And so he was 14 when it was legalized. And so he started, and the legalization, I think, pushed for kids to feel like it was more normal. And so he started using marijuana. It became popular back then, and it totally same thing. She said she watched her kid turn into someone she didn't even recognize. And he had actually went to her just a few days before he died by suicide and told him, "You were right about marijuana. The weed hurt my brain. And it's ruined my mind," is ultimately what he told his mom. She had been sharing that with him, like, this is really harmful for your brain. And so he ended up coming to her and would die a few days later to suicide. So we are going to talk about how it leads to mental health struggles, suicide ideation, that sort of thing. But there was a study where 11.6 million residents in Canada who received hospital care for cannabis use disorder were 9.7 times more likely to have died by suicide within 5 years relative to the general population. So like I said, I've also spent a lot of my time specializing in suicidality, and there is a link. There is a link to increased risk with marijuana use, cannabis use. So just a little overview. We're going to talk about marijuana and its effects on the brain. We're going to talk about the potency, how much, how off, the frequency, how all those things play into the risks that marijuana has, the myths versus reality, what we see. And then ultimately, we're going to talk about some practical tools, just real world conversations that we can have with our youth about this, how we can have those conversations to where it's productive, because I've worked with teens. We have to be able to communicate with them on their level, relate to them, and then treatment approaches that are being used to help with this. So let me just ask you guys, what are some common things you hear when it comes to marijuana, just in general?
People say it's the only thing that helps.
The only thing that helps.
Makes me feel calm.
Okay. Yep. What are some other common things we hear? all natural, the plant. I often hear, because of this idea that it's like a plant and all natural, that there's like some level of safety attached to it. I have on here, not addictive. Sometimes I hear that. I don't know if you've heard that. Not a gateway drug. I've also heard it described as that.
Better than alcohol.
Better than alcohol. Yes. So I have definitely youth, even parents say, I'd rather my kids smoke marijuana than drink. I've heard that. So again, I think there's a misconception that it's safer. Everyone does it. That is, especially when I worked in the high school, our bathrooms were loaded with kids using marijuana. It was very, very true. But ultimately not everyone is doing it, right? But what we do, there is this kind of following the crowd idea with it as well. And then the idea that it's legal, that's a huge thing that I think we hear today. And it's not legal for youth, obviously. But I think being that it's legal for adults now, it gives this common misconception that it's like, okay, right? And so my son actually said that to me when I tried to have talks with him. He said all these things. It's all natural. All my friends are doing it. It's legal. And of course I was like, it's not legal for kids, but so very common misconception. And then medicinally, right? Like marijuana can be used medicinally. And I will get into this, but I think it's important to note that when it is used medicinally, that's maybe a different story if it's under the care of a doctor, potency, all those things that we're considering. But I think it just makes it kind of it downplays, right? The effects that marijuana can really have. So what is the reality? Natural doesn't mean safe, like I said, right? Tobacco and poison ivy are also plants, right? And those are not safe. 1 in 16 who use cannabis develop cannabis use disorder. So it definitely increases your risk. Medical marijuana studies have only used under 10% concentrate of THC, which we're going to talk about. So experts actually say that anything above 15% is way too high and it becomes no longer medicinal. And that's basically what all marijuana is today. We are well above 15%. So we're going to get into that. Alcohol is harmful too. Definitely not downplaying alcohol, but cannabis really disrupts the developing brain. We're going to really spend our time talking about the developing brain and how harmful it is for that. And so it is definitely not safer. Definitely not. And studies have shown, so this is interesting when I was looking into this. So it's self-reporting, right? So I mean, take that with a grain of salt. Studies have shown that most teens are reporting that they don't use regularly. So it's not everyone's doing it, that kind of idea that everyone's doing it. However, it is self-reporting. So I'll just mention that. So again, why is it so harmful? The brain is under construction. The frontal lobe is the last to develop. It's still pruning. And so all these things are really risky. Addiction increases by 4 to 7 times when youth start using marijuana. So the earlier you use, the higher the risk is that you're going to develop an addiction to it. And there is actually an advisory from the Surgeon General on marijuana and its impacts on the developing brain.
During our teenage years, how we interact with the world changes. We seek out new interests and experiences, take more risks, and spend more time with our friends and less with our family. These behaviours have developed through evolution to make sure we push ourselves so that we learn to become independent from our parents. By putting ourselves in new and challenging situations, different parts of our brain learn to work together, forming brain circuits that can communicate with each other rapidly to help us respond in different ways. Ensuring that our brain is wired in the right way during the teenage years with strong and healthy brain circuits is critical to our future and how we get the most out of life. 3 of the most important circuits that are developing during this period are those involved in learning and memory, motivation, and mood. Learning and memory circuits control our ability to receive, store, and recall information. Our motivation circuit is supported by an inbuilt reward system that helps us to decide if something is important and whether we should do something to get it. Our mood is shaped by emotional circuits that interpret how we experience and react to different situations and interactions. Making sure these particular circuits wire in the right way during our teenage years is the brain's own occupational health and safety team, the endocannabinoid system. The endocannabinoid system is a complex and delicate brain system which helps to fine-tune communication within these circuits, ensuring the wiring is assembled correctly, damaged cells are repaired, and the right connections are strengthened for the future. When looking into the effect of cannabis on the brain, scientists found that we naturally produce a brain chemical called anandamide that is similar to cannabis. Concentrations of anandamide are delicately calibrated for it to accomplish its critical role within the endocannabinoid system. This is why, if we add cannabis into the brain, it causes the endocannabinoid system to become flooded with cannabis chemicals. It's a bit like dumping a bucket of salt on your chips instead of a pinch. Or like stadium speakers being plugged into your iPod. Constantly disrupting the endocannabinoid system with cannabis impacts how your brain develops, and in particular, how the mood, motivation, and learning and memory circuits get wired. Short-term memory loss is a common characteristic of long-term heavy cannabis use, because when you use cannabis, less information gets saved as memories. This is why it's harder to learn and remember new information, which can lead to significant drops in school grades. Cannabis can reduce your ability to focus attention, to organise yourself and make decisions, not just when you're using cannabis, but for weeks afterwards. Cannabis use can also lead to loss of motivation. Heavy users can feel detached and disinterested in things they used to like, such as sports, hobbies, and catching up with friends. It can also lead to low self-confidence that in turn affects your mood, making it more difficult to manage everyday stresses, worries, and frustrations, which can result in prolonged low mood, anxiety, and depression. While these effects are commonly experienced by people who use cannabis regularly, new research suggests that these effects are worse and more permanent for people who start using cannabis while their brain is still developing. This is because the endocannabinoid system plays a central role in the development of your neural circuitry during the teenage years. The developing brain has a pretty good blueprint to work off, but our experiences and interactions with the outside world also help to shape these neural circuits that we will rely on as adults. Your teenage years are an adventure that sets you up for life. Enjoy the ride and look after your brain. It's the only one you've got.
So we have the system like it talked about in there, the endocannabinoid system, or I cannot pronounce this. Cannot pronounce this. Cannabinergic is how you say it. System. So you can hear it. It's both are the same thing. And so there's two main receptors within this system. So there's the CB1 receptors, which is our central nervous system. So that's what houses like our hippocampus, which is responsible for memory. Our cortex, the decision-making, the amygdala, which is for our emotional center, basal ganglia, motor control and planning, and then the cerebellum, which is the motor control and coordination. And then we have the CB2 receptors, which is located peripherally, and that is linked to our immune system. So our endocannabinoid system is affected by cannabis. So how it's affected is we have our brain and mood system, that's CB1 receptors. So these are like tiny little switches in the brain that helps to regulate mood. And so they respond naturally to brain chemicals called anandamides. And so that literally means supreme joy. So that's where we get like our joy from. And then there's the balance keepers. So these receptors act like a thermostat in our brain. So keeping things so that they're like not too much gas, and not too much break, okay? And then we have why this matters in the adolescence years is because during the teen years, the brain is busy pruning. Like I said, it's pruning connections. So you can imagine it like shaping a healthy tree. And so this pruning is especially delicate because their prefrontal cortex is still developing, right? And so it's very delicate during the teenage years, and that impacts, judgment, planning, impulse control, and all of these things. This pruning that's happening is crucial for healthy development. And so when THC floods this system, it literally it counteracts like the balance of glutamate which is essential for the pruning process and for things to develop healthily. So that is really crucial during this time, that this system is able to develop without getting flooded. And so the endocannabinoid system regulates digestion, nausea, vomiting. And so another thing that you see commonly with individuals who use too much marijuana is they might have stomach issues like chronic vomiting. We've seen that. So the ER, they did some studies a couple years ago, and they were getting flooded with people coming in, and there was high rates of individuals who were using cannabis, especially higher frequency use, that were having what's called cannabis hypermesis syndrome. Words are so hard for me with this. So this condition is frequently seen, like I said, with THC use, especially with the dabbing and the concentrate. So we're going to talk about that, like the bud, the regular flower versus the concentrates. The concentrates are obviously higher. The bud is also higher now in potency, but the dabs and oils are what's really causing a lot of issues for people. And that's what we're commonly seeing used, especially in teens as well, because they're in little vape pens, right, that are virtually odorless. They can do them anywhere, everywhere. And so it definitely impacts our gut, not only just the brain, but the gut. High potency, frequent use, obviously, like flips that system, our ECS system. And then, like I said, they've seen rising cases in the ER of this situation. So key takeaway here is high potency THC hijacks the body's nausea control system. And so turning to marijuana for the remedy can actually cause it. So like sometimes people will say they use it for nausea, right? But if you use too much, it can actually cause nausea. Does that make sense? So it's like a very, very delicate balance of that. I will say, and I want to say this. So we're talking here about marijuana in a developing brain, right? Obviously adult use can be different. And then medicinally, it can be different. So like I know people who have had cancer that have taken edibles and that sort of thing to help with the nausea, and it does help in small doses, right? But when we flood the system with it, we're talking, the higher use, that's where you really see these issues coming in. So why, somebody said this back in the beginning, why do people use cannabis? Why do teens turn to cannabis use? And one of the things I often hear is it calms me, right? So like we know, a lot of teens are dealing with anxiety, depression, and so THC does have a calming effect. Again, those CB1 receptors helps with that emotion and stress response. And so normally your brain's natural cannabinoids, that bliss molecule helps regulate and restore balance with the stress. And so when THC hits those receptors, it can help slow down racing thoughts, increase dopamine, which is like that pleasure reward system. So they get like that relief. It relaxes muscle tension, so you feel that in your body. And it does reduce stress in the short term because, again, it's impacting those CB1 receptors. And so this is why some people feel calmer and more relaxed, and then sometimes that euphoric feeling with THC. But why does it backfire? Because it's an artificial flood, right? So the THC is overstimulating those CB1 receptors. And so the system that your brain is trying to rebalance. And then the rebound with anxiety. So when the THC wears off, which we're going to talk about this, it has less of that natural calming signal that it normally produces. And so then there's a dopamine drop, right? We have a dopamine drop when you come off of it, which then leads to like irritability, affects their mood, that sort of thing, agitation. And then you go into that withdrawal cycle. And so with frequent use, like I said, we're going to talk about like onset and duration and how that impacts this. But with frequent use, people end up needing to use again to feel calm again, right? Now they're just tanking their dopamine levels and interfering, they're flooding their CB1 receptors. And so it's like borrowing calm on a credit card. It feels good in the moment, but you're going to pay the interest later, right? So leading to worse anxiety, worse irritability, and bigger cravings. So then similar with depression, right? THC gives that dopamine surge. So that temporary elevation for the mood and pleasure. It gives a numbing effect. So teens will obviously use this to help with if they're feeling the depression, not to feel it, right? Not to feel the sadness, not to feel the heaviness, and then that euphoria effect. But again, crashes that dopamine, and it causes that disruption to those endocannabinoid system. And then over time, it can increase the risk for depression, psychosis. We're going to get into that, but it increases risk with all that. And then withdrawal symptoms overlap with depression. So now you're feeling higher irritability. Now your mood is even more off. You're having sleep problems. So all those symptoms you were having before, now it's worse because we just flooded the system. And so it ends up, again, backfiring. So we have also in our body, we have neurotransmitters that's connected to so we have our automatic nervous system, which is like our body's autopilot. And then we have two main chemical messengers within, which is neurotransmitters that work in conjunction with our nervous system. So that's acetylcholine and then norepinephrine. Oh my gosh, I cannot speak. Fight or flight mode. So the sympathetic nervous system is responsible for like it's our emotional center. Like if we're sensing danger, we go into fight or flight. So that releases the norepinephrine chemical. And then the parasympathetic nervous system is when we're in rest and digest, calm state. So normal neurotransmitters in teenage development, we have the gas pedal chemicals. So like dopamine, glutamate, and teens have higher levels of these neurotransmitters. So this is what drives curiosity, reward seeking, exploration, learning. And so teens often feel unstoppable. That's why it's like they often feel invincible, right? That's a definitely normal feeling in the teenage years. And it's because they have these higher levels of dopamine and glutamate. And then we have our brake chemicals, which is the serotonin and GABA. So these calming neurotransmitters help to regulate our mood. They slow things down, apply caution. But in teens, this is still developing. This is the part that's really developing. And so again, this is in the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for the decision-making impulse control. And so what happens is in adolescence, the gas pedal is really strong, okay? But the brakes are really weak. And so this natural imbalance pushes teens to explore more, have more risky behavior. They're more prone to make risky choices. And this is why, because this is literally, I mean, their brain is designed because it's still developing. This is how it's working. So how does this connect to marijuana use? So THC hijacks that gas pedal. So I'm a visual person. So when I can see it like that, it overstimulates the dopamine and glutamate pathways, and it makes risk taking more intense. So what happens is the weak brakes, they already have weak brakes, right? The brakes get weaker. So again, since the brain is not fully developed till 25 plus years old, research is actually showing maybe even later, it impairs judgment, self-control, all those things. So also when teens start using marijuana, now their judgment's impaired, and that's what can lead to increased use and all those things. And I have some studies that show that as well. So teens are more likely to make risky choices, use more substances, drive while using substances. They're more likely to make those decisions because they're less capable of being able to put the brakes on, right? So ultimately, how we see this causing issues is we have the higher neurobiological tendencies just with how their brain works with risk-taking, with the decreased suppressed regulatory system. And so there's lots of go, go, go for teens and very little ability to put on the brakes. And so sometimes too, like low parental monitoring, maybe not intentionally, but just teens are out with their friends more, right? So there's a little bit low parental monitoring, and that high peer affiliation, high peer influence, that's what makes them at risk for potentially abusing marijuana and all the behavioral and issues that come with that. So when we talk about like what increases the risk of teens developing issues because of marijuana, we need to talk about potency, so how strong what they're using is, onset, and so when they began using, and then frequency, how often are they using? These really play into the struggles that teens might end up having with marijuana use. So THC has tripled in potency. So you guys, back when we were growing up, it was 2 to 5% concentrated of THC. Today, the dabs and oils that I was talking about, the concentrates, those can be upwards of 99.4% concentrated of THC. And then even the flower, the bud, they're showing that around 45% today. Like I said, experts are saying that we should never be above 15% concentrated with THC. And we're like well above that. Even medicinally, the potency of marijuana is interacting with the actual medicinal use of it when it was more safe. Under 10% is what they say we should be for even medicinal use. So what this is doing, obviously, is it's flooding the brain and those systems that we just talked about, right? And so it's causing dependency, it's causing withdrawals, which we'll get into, and psychosis. Like I said, I saw it in my own son. I didn't believe it. I started going into different studies. I couldn't believe that marijuana could do that. Well, when we think about the potency, again, and we look at the brain, it makes sense. So these are just a couple studies. Like this one showed that the population could have avoided psychosis episodes up to 30 to 50% if they hadn't been using high potency. That's what that study is saying. So I basically just covered all this. The concentrates 60 to 90%. Low potency is considered under 5%, which back in the day we were 2 to 5%. So that's when marijuana did feel safer, was when we had the concentrates much, much lower. And now we're well above 50% in today's world. So then onset also matters. So obviously the potency, so if kids are dabbing, especially using the concentrates, that's really going to cause issues. And then onset, so how young they start using, again, starting before the age of 18, they're 4 to 7 times more likely to develop an addiction. And so these are just a couple of studies showing that and like the long-term lasting impacts on their memory and that sort of thing as well. And we're going to talk about how it impacts the IQ. But whenever I talk to teens about this, because obviously we know the DARE program when it was coming and like, just don't do this, right? Don't do drugs, that didn't work. So I always talk to kids, I educate them on some of these things, like, hey, here's what it's doing to your brain. And I just highly encourage them to delay, like your brain is still developing. And if you can't delay, lower your frequency, lower what you're using, maybe not dabs, the flower. And again, I'm not advocating for any use. I'm just saying when we're talking to teens who are struggling, these are the conversations. We need to be helping them understand how they can reduce their risk, right? And so it's really just educating them is a huge thing. And then frequency. So again, how often they're using. So obviously when psychosis is more at risk, it's higher usage, higher potency, that sort of thing is obviously going to play into the potential of developing psychosis and those sorts of issues. Okay, so we went over that. I'm going to fly by some of this because we started a little bit late. So what is this ultimately translating into when teens are getting into marijuana use, and where can this ultimately lead if they're using too much, too often, all those things? We're seeing a lot of addiction dependence. So we are seeing withdrawal. That is something that many studies now are pointing to. We're seeing psychosis and increased risk of schizophrenia later in life, like an actual schizophrenia diagnosis. There's studies showing that. Mood disorders, so it's obviously interfering with anxiety, depression. We're seeing bipolar diagnosed at higher rates. And again, if a lot of teens are using marijuana, I think there's some correlations there. And then even violence, because it's interacting with their ability to make clear decisions, right? And with that irritability, like I talked about that withdrawal symptom, it can definitely lead to that. So the psychosis is a big thing. These are just all studies. The suicidal ideation, like I said, one study found that they were more likely to attempt suicide if they were engaging in marijuana. And so it definitely leads to increased risk with that. PTSD, it shows that they have greater symptoms with that. And then again, when we talk about the withdrawal, how it can cause that anger, irritability, aggression, there's some studies linking it to even increased violence in teens. Okay, so IQ and brain development, like I said, I mean, we talked about how it affects the hippocampus, which is responsible for our memory and that sort of thing. And so IQ points, this is a study that showed that it decreased the IQ points by 8 points. So it's definitely affecting memory, learning, all of those things. And again, it's going back to those CB1 receptors. So these are just studies showing that marijuana does cause withdrawals. And this one study in the middle here found that it was clinically significant withdrawal symptoms were reported. So sleep problems, irritability, depressed mood, cravings, restlessness. And working in this, I have seen teens trying to come off of it, and they talk about the panic attacks that they're having coming off of it. Again, going back to what I said a few slides ago about how initially it does the calm and then it floods the system, and now the anxiety is actually worse coming off of it. So these are just common withdrawal symptoms that teens will experience that have been reported in these studies. Okay, so what are some tools? Like, how do we have conversations with our youth about this? How do we help to prevent some of these issues that are really, truly, I think we're going to start seeing a huge fallout even more. We already are, but I think it's just going to continue until we really get a hold of the substances that are out there. Unfortunately, in today's world, they're a lot stronger than they used to be, right? So the marijuana is stronger. Now we have fentanyl that's changed the game, right? We have all these things that youth are navigating. And honestly, it's robbing them of that typical teenage experimentation phase. Again, not saying it's right, but since the beginning of time, teens are higher in risk taking, go, right? Lower in their break and ability to reason. And so that is something that teens engage in. And these types of substances with the potency is really changing the game, and it's causing a lot of harm. So I want to talk about really quickly, when we look at like, why do people use substances? Like, so, you know, the substance use is what we see. That's like the behavior. It starts as a behavior because it's a choice, but then it becomes a dependency. But so we see that, but what's underneath it, right? What's leading these teens to feel like they need to use? And obviously there's many things. I mean, I think pure influence and desire to fit in. I think one of the teens said that on the panel, that it's like kind of glorified. It's like kind of cool to put it on Snapchat and whatever else. And then stress, anxiety, obviously they're trying to cope with that. Maybe even boredom. I mean, you know, I think that is definitely a factor. And then the perception that everyone's doing it when there is a lot of people around them doing it, obviously that peer influence. And then coping with unmet emotional needs. So I want to point to at the root of all human behavior, and I use this in my therapy that I do with clients, even with suicidal ideation. Adlerian psychology, so Alfred Adler, he developed Adlerian psychology, and he talks about how at the root of all human needs, all of our core needs, is to belong and feel significant. And so anytime I treat a client for whatever I'm treating them for, I'm always aware that at the very root of what they need is to feel belonging and significance. And so even when we talk about the peer pressure, if they really just started using for peer pressure, maybe their life wasn't that hard. I mean, they just, again, it's a belonging piece, right? They need to belong. And then to feel significant is we need to know that we have value, that we feel important, all those things. So I just wanted to bring your guys' attention to that. Like when you're having conversations with teens, trying to get to the root of what they're feeling. Where are they feeling like they're not belonging? Where are they feeling like maybe that significance is lacking? So we need to feel connected to something bigger, or connected to others. And then we need to feel valued, capable, that our life matters. And when we don't feel these things, sometimes it does lead to increased risk in substance use and these issues that we're talking about. So with positive discipline, for any caregivers, whether you're a helping professional or parents, I always say connection before correction. So before I ever talk to a kid about like, hey, look, this use, you know, and we start talking about their substance use and maybe how that's impacting them negatively, you got to create the connection first, right? So even as a parent, whatever you are, you've got to get on their level. You've got to connect with them. You've got to hear them, all those things, before you can start the correction, right? Or sharing with them. And so that's huge. Shared responsibility and voice. So again, letting them have a voice, letting them have a say is really big. And then encouragement over praise. So these are principles of, I'm sorry, let me back up for a minute. Positive discipline, that was quite confusing. So off of Adlerian psychology principles, there's a curriculum called positive discipline that was formed for parents. So it's specifically for helping parents, but I think it's good for even helping professionals, right? And so these are some of the key factors within positive discipline. Is it's an empowerment model, connection before correction, those sorts of things. So one of the things that positive discipline also highlights is encouragement over praise. So we're so quick sometimes to praise our kids, like, hey, great job, that was awesome. But then that means our kids are seeking externally for approval, right? And they're not getting that intrinsic approval. And so what we actually want to do is encourage our kids, like, hey, I know you can do this. I see that you worked really hard for this, and just point out what you notice about them and encourage them versus praising, because we actually want to help them be able to get that intrinsic value, not have to look extrinsically. So I love positive discipline. I can share some things with you guys if you want to take down my email at the end, and I can send you some stuff on this, because I wish I could go more in detail today, but I can't. But there's so much here that's so good for helping to create these connections and help teens get to the root of maybe why they're using and help correct some of that. Problem solving together. So using curiosity questions is huge, like asking what and how questions, like, how is this impacting you? What can I do to help you? Not just like going at them and telling them what you think they need, right? Like just getting curious about why they're using, what their situation is. That's huge. Curiosity questions will go a long way. And it teaches accountability without the shame piece, right? And then focusing on their strengths and purpose. So helping them connect to things that give them meaning, give them purpose. So when teens feel that they belong and they know they're significant, the pull of substances weaken. I mean, that's with adults too, by the way. This is applicable to all of us. If we feel belonging and significance, we are going to be less likely to make destructive choices in our lives, right? So I believe these are protective shields, right, for substance use. So some other tips is to just keep the conversations small but often. So multiple little talks. Teens do not like lectures. Definitely, never lecturing, right? And then short and casual, just everyday moments to like make an, I don't know, just as you listen to them and hear about their world, like just use little moments to educate where it fits, right? And then, you can bring up like, hey, I went to this presentation and I read this, or I read this study. What do you think about that? Just like starting to put it out there and get their input on what they're hearing, what they're noticing. Open-ended questions, active listening, obviously all those things are really good. And then balancing information. So the myths versus the realities, what we talked about, right? Like, what are you guys hearing? It's all natural, it's safe, right? So like talking about the myths and what are really the realities. Some people say, so just an example, some people say weed helps with stress. Science shows that it can actually increase that. And then educating them on that. And then just sharing honestly, authentically, like, you guys, we were teens once too, right? I think sometimes we forget that. But being able to share in like your own experiences and maybe where you've struggled or where you've seen the impacts of this in your life, like that sort of thing, can really help get on teens levels. Setting clear boundaries together. So again, I think talking about like their brain health and what goals do we want to put in place for this? Like, I just want you to be able to develop healthily, right? And so discussing that with them and doing that together, setting those boundaries, setting those expectations together. It's not the parent setting it or the caregiver, it's both together, if that makes sense. And then being informed, like you guys are doing, like informing yourself, staying up to date on the information so that you can continue to have these conversations with the youth in your life. And then harm reduction. So like I said, if teens are using, of course, we're not promoting it and we ultimately want to get them to a spot where they're not. But harm reduction, if they are, and we're trying to help them come off, less often, lower your potency, avoid mixing substances, delay using, right? Like if you're curious about this, the longer you can delay, the better it is for your brain. And then just keeping that conversation going. And then offering support, like I think normalizing seeking help. And, if you don't feel comfortable coming to me, let's get somebody who you do feel comfortable coming with, right? So if you guys are, I don't know how many are parents and professionals, but like, when you're working with parents too, encouraging them to help, to encourage their kids to seek help, like, yes, please come to me. And if I'm not the person, it's okay to go to others. So that's huge. And then building protective factors within the family. So again, I think family meals, like we got to get back to that family unit, right? Like those are all things that are really going back to that connection piece. They need to feel connected in their own environments. Okay, where are we at on time? So I want to make sure, perfect. So just a couple closing reminders with having conversations about youth about this, being curious, not critical. That's a huge thing. I just think when I, as a mom, because we all do it, like when I start to go towards my like telling them what to do, right? Or my critical tendencies, I pull back and say, wait a second, am I approaching this from a curious place? It changes everything when I do. Be consistent, not controlling. I think that that's the same thing with as caregivers, as parents. we're apt to go to like we have this false sense of control, right? Like we can control what our kids do, we can control what the youth do. We can't, right? They're their own people. And so just be there for them consistently, but not controlling. And every small talk is a step towards protecting their brain health. Every small talk about this. So some therapeutic approaches that are really helpful with this. So if there's youth in your life that you're connecting to services, or you're the parent and you're wondering, where to start, motivational interviewing is really good for helping teens struggling with substance use and just individuals in general. But it really helps to like empower them to find like what is their motivation for maybe wanting to change. And so it's really good at asking questions that help bring that out in people. And it's a very like collaborative, non-judgmental approach. Cognitive behavioral therapy really just helps like how maybe identifying their thought patterns and how that interferes with like the behaviors that they're doing and the choices that they're making. And so then they can build coping skills within that for the stress, for the triggers, whatever it is that's leading them to use. And then family-based interventions is huge, like involving parents and caregivers, addressing the family dynamics. That even as a therapist myself, we needed that help from outsiders with my own son, right? Like somebody outside of the situation to help improve those family dynamics and that communication. So family-based interventions are huge as well. Aside from those clinical evidence-based approaches to helping individuals struggling with substance use, mindfulness and neurofeedback. I don't know if any of you have heard of neurofeedback, but that's showing a lot of promising results for reducing stress, anxiety, those sorts of things. Peer recovery and support groups. I definitely believe you guys heard the youth panel. That peer-to-peer interaction is so important. We just want to make sure that they have it coming from healthy ways and outlets, right? But like structured peer recovery support groups can be great, right? So they know they're not alone in that. And then even the awesome thing about phones, because there's a lot of hard things and bad things, right? But there is a lot of apps out there for these things. And so maybe that's a good starting place. If they don't want to talk to somebody, there's apps out there that will give you skills and ideas on how to cope. So I think all of these supports as well are important. Okay, so just leaving you guys with a call to action. The adolescent brain is still under construction, bottom line. That's why it's so harmful. So it's fragile, but full of potential. Fragile, but full of potential. So marijuana may be marketed as harmless, but science is clear that the cost is too high. So we are the guardians of this generation's mind. When we lead with truth and connection, we give teens that belonging, significance, and future filled with hope. So may we be the guides who help youth rise above the smoke. I love that, fragile but full of potential. Like they are, right? And so we need to help teens see that too, right? Like let's take care of your brain, and ultimately do that in a way that is helping to create that connection and that truth and giving them hope. Okay, any questions? I think I was worried we were going to be cut on time, but any questions about what we discussed? Yeah, doing good. I know I went through that fast because I was a little worried. I had a lot of slides. Any thoughts, any comments, what you're seeing? I don't know if there's anything in the chat.
I mean, just you kind of hit it on I think on the nose and stuff like that, because a lot of adolescents don't think it's a problem. Even adults, they say it's like you said, it's legalized, and and they don't realize that like when I was talking to you earlier, that to a point it's legalized,
right?
But I can kind of remember quite a few back in my beginnings of working in this field. I worked at an adolescent program, and I never saw anybody go through withdrawals. And I ended up working at a adolescent that was 15 years old that went through withdrawals from marijuana, and I was like, oh, so okay, this is what withdrawals from marijuana looks like, and stuff, and the thing was that he was from another country. He was actually from one of the countries down in South America and stuff like that, and was used to doing the marijuana, the cannabis from South American countries that were back. This was like back in the
Less
early,
potent.
well, back in the early 2000s and
Yeah.
stuff like that. And
Yeah,
he was like going through withdrawals crazy. He couldn't even stand up straight
I know.
and stuff.
Yeah, it's real. The withdrawals are I've seen it too. Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of motivational interviewing, I don't know if everybody knows what that technique is, but it is a very powerful technique.
It
Can
is.
you talk a little bit about motivational interviewing and how that would support someone in any situation, but especially with substance use?
Yeah, so motivational interviewing really asks a lot of, first of all, like curiosity type questions, but it's really helping the client identify where they're at with their struggle. What, if any, change do they want to see, right? And so it's helping them, it's kind of talking about that intrinsic motivation, right? It's not us putting interventions on them or saying, this is how you should be thinking or feeling. It's really getting them to draw out what they want, what they feel. And in doing that, in allowing the client the autonomy in that, they're going to be more successful in their recovery. So that's especially why for substance use, I think it's a great one, because it's really helping them to see, how is their substance use impacting them? Is this something they want to change? What is it? Like, it's just these really curious questions that are helping them to start to uncover the layers. And it just helps guide them into, like, as we go along in the process, the way that as things are coming up, we can continue to ask questions like, oh, I heard you say, that it's impacting you in this area of your life. Do you want that to change? Right. And so it's like, sometimes allowing that person to pause and look back, because maybe they can't see it when they're in it, and start to reflect on, like, oh yeah, I didn't realize that it was impacting this area. And and so it helps them to decipher. And that's with, like you said, anything, you can use that beyond, for treating substances, but we find it really helpful for that population, because the person has to come to want themselves to change and get clean, right? Like, that has to come from them. And so motivational interviewing is really good at asking those questions that draw upon that intrinsic reason. Yeah.
Personally, from like a young adult aspect, I think one of the things that needs to be worked on is when people go to like therapy or like treatment for it, it gets really difficult when they come out, because they maybe like they didn't talk to their friends, and those are the people that they were hanging out with for so many years, and that's all they're doing is when they hang out, they're like, maybe they say, oh, we're just gonna go watch a movie, but then it's like, all right, I got invited to this party, let's go. And it's like, if you say no, it's having those conversations with those people, being like, hey, look, we can still be friends. I just don't want to do this. Let's find something else to do it, and being like educating both people on both sides.
Ooh, I love that. Yeah, that's huge. Being able to advocate for yourself to your friends, right? Like, hey, I'm not doing this anymore. So can we, when we hang out, can we do something different? Yeah. And then educating the friends. I hear what you're saying. Like having just across the board education in general to teens, like, hey, look, if your friends are in recovery, like supporting that, right? Like, if you haven't come to that decision yourself, that's one thing. But yeah, I think being aware of your friends who have chosen not to do that anymore. Yeah, I love that. That's great. I think it's hard to do sometimes, right? Is to advocate for ourselves. Yeah.
I don't think people are like taught.
Yeah, no matter if you're an adolescent or adult, trying to advocate for yourself,
It's hard.
it's hard.
What were you gonna say, hon?
I just don't think like people are necessarily trained on how to have those conversations. And a lot of people, they're like, well, I just like can't like text them about it.
I see what you're saying. So educate them when they're in the program and they're getting help. Like, how can they have those conversations with their friends?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or because then when you just like go home, or like you have time on the weekends and stuff, like it's like, okay, I either do this or I have nothing to do. And it's like trying to figure out, what am I gonna do? Like, and
yeah. So really honing in on life beyond.
Like, yeah, and then you see other people through social media with
Yeah.
different things online saying like there's this, like if
Yeah.
you're not doing this, and then other people from the school go again, and they're just like more people are going to more parties because that's all that people are like doing when they hang out, and they're saying, oh, if you're not gonna do this, then like I can't be friends with you. And they have like a group of like 25 people, and they're like singling out people, you know?
Yeah. And sometimes maybe it's them exploring those friendships, right? And I know, I hear what you're saying, when a lot of people are doing that, it's hard, right? But I do talk to kids too about like, is this a good friend for you, right? Is this a good influence, you know? So maybe even reevaluating some of your friendships. Yeah, it's huge. Thanks for bringing that up, Pen. Did you have a question? Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I'm really ignorant in this whole subject. How many of the parents are using? Like, what percentage of adult population
Yeah.
is using marijuana?
Good question. I don't have those exact numbers, but I will say it's pretty prevalent at this point, just like alcohol, right? We can really put it on that level because of
Is it equivalent, do you think, as far as the same amount of people, not the same people,
right?
but the same amount of people that are drinking?
Yeah.
Probably you.
I don't have, like, again, I didn't pull up those numbers, but I just in my experience, like I would say it's pretty close. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And in fact, I mean, there's plenty of adults too that like they don't want to drink because of how that makes them feel, but the marijuana makes they don't get hangovers, they don't get whatever, right? They can function better with that. So I think marijuana use in adults is super prevalent.
It's super prevalent,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And in your experience, are some of these parents bringing their kids in saying, hey, they're doing it too, will you help them? And then they're going back home and seeing their parents do it, is that?
So I've seen a mix with that, like I hear what you're saying, I think that I haven't necessarily seen parents influencing their kids to do it, right? Like they don't want- Yeah, but I think again, going back to what it creates is this idea that, well, my parents do it, well, you know, society and just as a whole is doing it, you know, it's pretty normalized, right? And so I think that I do see that issue, like that if parents are using, then, you know, why can't I?
Normalizes it in the family structure.
Kind of like alcohol, like if you think about that, like with alcohol, it's like kids know that they shouldn't be using alcohol because they're not of age.
Yeah.
You know, so it's the same thing with marijuana, they know that, but because it's so normalized and they see their parents and their friends, their kids' parents and everybody coming together and alcohol's involved in family gatherings and whatever else, like it kind of
normalized, that makes sense.
Normalizes it.
And if you're going off of that, you're not old enough, that's like, well, you spent on the way here, you just broke the law there.
Right.
That's not substantial enough to change
No,
behavior.
that's why we have to help educate them with what it does to their brain, right? Like really what's happening. And I think the key thing, if you take anything away from this, it's honing in on the potency of today's marijuana. Like it is not, I think as adults, like even before I had all this understanding, like we had this misperception that it's like the weed of the 70s. You know, that really was not as harmful. It really, you know, it was because the potency was 2 to 5%, right? And so I think a lot of adults still have that idea about marijuana that it really.
We did it, it's okay, but now it's.
Yeah, and it wasn't. It really, honestly, was not as dangerous as it is today. Yeah. All right, is that time? Yeah. If anybody else has questions, so right here, if you scan that counseling site email or just take down my email. I'm happy to send you the PowerPoint and some other information associated with this, like I talked about with Adlerian psychology. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me. Yeah.
All right, everyone, can you guys give it up for Lindsay for our presentation?